All right. Hello, everyone. For this next panel, we're going to be talking about what narratives will drive the next bull market. On stage here, we have some investors, founders. Should be really exciting chat. I'm going to flip it over to the team to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about what they're working on, what they do, and the companies they work at.
Hey guys, don't come to it. Have done sit down or move up. Yoshi.
Is this working? For guys, please, for people in the back, there is a big networking room upstairs, if you don't mind, so we can hear the panelists. Thank you.
Daniel, you want to start? Oh, yeah.
Hi, can you hear me? My name is Dan Simerman. I'm a co-founder of a trading platform called Mintify. Mintify is part of this next wave of digital asset platforms that are not really focused on what type of network or what type of marketplace, but it's one easy place to discover and buy assets regardless of where they are.
Hey guys, my name is Sunny Parikh. I lead the venture fund at Reflexive Ventures. Prior to this, I was at Point72 doing digital assets and fintech. We really focus on where we think the missing gap is in blockchain and crypto adoption, which is applications and use cases, and where blockchain and crypto can uniquely solve real world problems. I like to say I invest in companies that I can explain to my mom. And so everything we do is about really just solving a problem where crypto is abstracted. And that's the narrative which we invest in, which we'll dive into.
Sunny is a very intelligent mom, though. So it's I'm Mike Bucella. I co-founded a firm called Neoclassic Capital. Our primary strategy is early stage venture. I've been in crypto investing since 2017. I had a firm previously called Block Tower. Prior to that was in TradFi at Goldman for 10 years. And that's it.
Yeah. Awesome.
And he's a Mets fan.
And I'm a Mets fan, which is, I can finally be proud of that hat. I've worn this hat for years. This isn't a
finally hits. And I'm Bobby. I'm a principal at CoinFund. CoinFund is one of the oldest investment vehicles in crypto. We have seed stage to mid stage to liquid fund, and broad focus on all things crypto infrastructure application. So diving into the conversation for today, I want to start out by just kind of going down the line and defining what narratives mean to you in crypto, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Narratives are everything in crypto. I mean, yeah, I guess as an investor, you in the liquid side, you kind of trade narrative momentum. I think on the early stage venture side, you try and identify narratives while they're either one, contrarian, or two, even better, if they're understudied or underknown. So, that was high throughput blockchains in the 2018 and 19 cycle that got you investments like Solana and, other gaming related assets before that was popular, like Dapper Labs and Axie Infinity. And then, if you were early into DeFi in 2019, 2020, basically the idea is you kind of have to be a little bit contrarian with at least a portion, if not the larger portion of your book in venture, because you need to get in at valuations that are what are considered to be attractive so that you can 100x your investment and actually return that capital to investors. So, it's hard. I think the very critical part for us is understanding the liquid markets as well as we understand the early stage markets. And you kind of have to manage both as an investor with the founders, marketing the narrative of whatever they're doing. And hopefully it's a first up. And if it's not a first of, hopefully they find craft a great marketing narrative that indicates they're a first of something. So it's, I'm half joking with that, but it's generally that's, narratives are truly in a world of lacking in cash flows and fundamentals, which a lot of crypto currently is, but won't be forever. Narratives are incredibly important.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Mike said. What I'll say is maybe slightly differently. Narratives, step back from crypto, narratives in investing, narratives in sports and politics. Narratives are important because they align everyone to a North Star. They get the team aligned, the early team, they get funders aligned, they get customers and partners aligned, and you kind of build towards the next thing. And once you get to the next milestone, more funding, more team. And so it's important to have that narrative and continue building. And they exist across outside of crypto. The unique part about narratives in crypto, though, is there are misaligned incentives. For blockchain crypto, for one of its unique superpower to be aligning incentives, it does a pretty bad job of aligning incentives. Because narratives in crypto, you can build towards this vision or market this vision. Marketing was said a few times. You market the vision, but you don't actually have to build it in many cases, because the unique nature of retail and token liquidity allows you to just keep on marketing the thing, monetize and leave without actually building towards a solution. I mean, if we look at some of the best outcomes that we kind of all talk about, Deribit, Hidden Road, some of the exits that have just recently happened, these founders, built through lots of cycles, perseverance, tenacity, and actually built real businesses. Where a lot of the narrative focused things many of us have invested in or we've seen, they haven't had people stick around for 7 years and building towards that because you don't need to. And I think that's the unfortunate part about narratives and kind of how they are used in crypto. We talk every 6 months a new narrative, and basically what they're asking is, what is the next thing I can hype and sell to retail? And so I hope some of the tokenomics, and maybe it's a contrarian view, but if we can fix that in a way we can align and build towards the long term, we'll have things that really create value in a sustainable way. And those are narratives we get excited about. Where are we solving real problems? Where are we finding interesting kind of lack of incentive alignment in current markets and current sectors, and solving those problems?
That was great. So before Mintify, I worked with large layer 1 protocols, and it really informed my how I think about narratives. Right? I think why narratives are so important in this space is that these are open standards wars. These are protocols competing for mind share across a group of token holders, of investors, of infrastructure providers, and in this marketplace of ideas, let's see. You're competing with people that may or may not know about the technology. So you have to find a technical primitive, or if you have a technical primitive, it can be based on the technology, it can be based on some other factor of the project. And you have to visualize it, and you have to create an emotional connection to these very complex technical ideas. So I think narratives are so important primarily because so many people don't know how to read the white papers, and so many people don't know, how all these architectures work. So building really powerful narratives is a very just simple way to get someone to understand what you're doing. And I think I think it's more prevalent in this space because we're building out in the open, we're building out in public, and these aren't companies, right? These are not companies selling products and services. Generally, these are protocols building ecosystems and competing, for the multiple types of standards that there are on the blockchain stack. So, for whatever reason, it lends itself to like narrative wars, I guess.
I think I totally agree with you. I think the challenge is like the marginal buyer for a lot of this ends up becoming unsophisticated investors in many cases. And so you can easily sell a narrative without matching to substance. In a traditional world where it's a more institutional investor looking at a Series B or Series C, a narrative alone does not get you that funding.
Right? Well, I think most narratives can be very fluffy, but the best narratives are actually tied to an architecture.
Totally. And let's say it matters, right? Yeah,
that's right. And they stick, right? So like modular is a really great narrative, right? Because it captures so much, and it communicates value in a way that most people don't even know how to perceive, right? Or they can perceive it because they know modular, it feels valuable. But most people, when they read technical white papers, it can be investors, it can be builders, they don't understand the tech. But a lot of narratives aren't about understanding, it's about perceived value.
Awesome. Well, you guys hit on a lot of points there. I think one that I'd like to dive in a little bit deeper with you all is, Sunny, you actually mentioned this, like narratives are important in everything we do because we're humans. Entrepreneurship, investing, Hollywood, it's all storytelling, right? So folks on this stage have built outside of crypto and invested outside of crypto. Why in crypto are narratives of such an outsized importance? Is there like, so, I mean, I think you mentioned open sourceness as something. What are other factors that contribute to this being such a big part of our collective conversations?
Well, I'll take a stab. I think, listen, narratives are very important, right? Because it helps communicate the story. I think in any early part of a new technology or a new paradigm, stories are more important on a relative basis because it gets everyone excited. It gets capital, people, intellect, like everyone pushing forward in that. And so we're early in that, right? And so AI has a similar, it's in a different stage now, but it's similar in different technology paradigms. Narratives are important. And then as the technology develops, it's less about the narrative, it's more about applications, use cases. Internet, mobile, cloud, all went through that kind of shift. In early days, it was like the power of the internet. Now everything is on the internet.
Yeah.
You know, you don't talk about internet.
So it's like, because we're early, and so you likely think that like as we mature and get more kind of critical mass of users.
I think Bitcoin's still a narrative.
Yeah.
Like it depends, I think, on the actual underlier. Like Bitcoin will perpetually be a narrative. Just like gold is, there's no fundamental model on, there's no financial model on gold.
Yeah.
So these are all, I mean, narratives can persist in perpetuity, and it's all, I mean, network effect was the term we all used for the last 8 years in crypto. It's network effect is due to narratives and the ability to express those to others and bring them into your network.
And don't you think that for as long as there's a token attached to an idea, a narrative is going to have to be a critical component of most blockchain projects?
Yeah, because the value far exceeds the financial value of whatever goes into that token. So yeah, that premium, I call premium to NAV in token world is narrative.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes there's an inverse correlation between utility and speculation. Right? So like the more you try and back or front load something with like all the functionality, it can take away from the narrative and the value of that token.
It's the same in traditional market. I mean, it was the joke from the show Silicon Valley. It's, you know, don't make a dollar,
Don't show revenue.
don't show revenue.
Revenue kills the dream. Yeah.
So I mean, that's
Right now, you're pre-revenue.
But I think here's the thing. I think as we move towards more substance, you know, to what you mentioned, we're hopefully going to be a little bit more than marketing and there's lots of good founders building interesting things that are sustainable. When you get towards that, the narrative then becomes like that application use case. So how do you scale this in the financial markets and payments and tokenization, and how do we solve these problems around real estate, whatever it might be, where these inefficiencies exist in the current world where blockchain and crypto are just a better solution. And then once you get to that, I think these narratives become less relevant. The narratives become more about the substance than about the story itself.
And I think you're right. The token side is always going to have, I think, always have narratives, but it depends on the bit, like Deribit. The first dollar into Deribit was at a 3 million valuation. It spits off 300 million of EBITDA a year. Coinbase now owns it. That doesn't need a narrative. I mean, the narrative drives the revenue, I suppose, because the narrative is in the tokens in which people are trading derivatives on. I guess everything comes down to a narrative.
Well,
I just talked myself out of that argument.
But also, like, listen, Berkshire has a narrative, right? It's trading at a premium.
Narrative is the US dollar.
Potentially, yeah. NVIDIA has a narrative, right? So there are narratives, but it's a relative to, like, right now, crypto is mostly narratives. So as you get to more substance, the relative weight of narrative to more substance and actual use case utility shifts in that favor.
Well, but you can have narratives that are very much tied to the architectures of technologies, right? Maybe we segment this into like, there are these very high level, like fantastical narratives, and there's some narratives that project teams can leverage to actually compete in the marketplace of ideas, right? Like the best narratives are narratives that your competitors cannot even attack because they can't access them. So there's all of these kind of ways that you can play the game of narratives when you're building standards wars. But like, I think a great example of that is like BitTensor, right? Like the Bitcoin for AI. That's a powerful narrative, right? It communicates so much to the average person, but anyone else in the industry.
But also nothing.
Exactly. I was like, but that's right? Like it's very, it's the Bitcoin for AI. Cool. I'm gonna grab it because, you know, AI needs Bitcoin, right? Like you can play many different levels of complexity for a narrative depending on what the goal is. But again, I think the best narrative is one where you can put it out once and every actor within the industry understands it from their perspective. So the VC understands it where it's going to generate value. The end user understands why they should hold the token. The infrastructure provider knows why they should prioritize you against millions of other projects that may or may not, be worth integrating. So really the best ones can tackle all of those, but those are very rare, almost impossible to find.
I think that's a really great setting the stage. I think Dan just perfectly laid out like what all needs to happen for like a narrative to actually be like positive, right? So I think with that, let's kind of shift away from the meta and towards the actual, and let's talk about what narratives are doing well right now and why we like them.
I try to look for narratives that aren't, again, I go back to being contrarian. So I think you want to either one, buy a distressed narrative. So either it's out of favor, right? Distress narrative.
You're like
you're
an investor.
You're out of favor. And so, that long-term, these things could come around and it's worth taking a bet because risk adjusted, you're likely going to come in at better valuations in terms of where the actual underlier is. So I think, for example, I call it a distressed sector or narrative right now is gaming. I think gaming is a sector that's going to explode over the next 10 years. Digitally native community. We'll put dollars behind that. We have put dollars behind that. New narratives. So again, it's distressed and then net new or understudied or under discussed is intellectual property. That's another segment I'm looking at a lot, and we're looking at it at our firm quite a bit. We made a handful of investments there. That is one where my business partner is more deeply connected to the Eastern Hemisphere, and conversations are happening at a much quicker pace over there. And so that's one of these sectors where it's become popular in a part of the market where media entertainment, particularly Korea, Japan, is quite, top of mind. In the US, that narrative hasn't caught on yet. So the Western funds or the Western investors aren't really talking about it. That's where you can take something that is undervalued, bring it to this market where the users, US is users and sort of foundational tech, high tech. You marry those two together, you're bridging East and West, which is an overused term, but effectively you do that and you get that narrative premium to explode. So those are areas those kind of fit into the buckets of what I said earlier of distressed and or net new.
Yeah.
Examples.
Fair warning, I'm going to give each of you kind of a hard time about whatever narratives you say are good. So starting off, just, you mentioned with gaming, that's a digitally native community. It's pretty much all aligned, all online, like digital assets exist in gaming. IP is a very like brick and mortar / real world kind of industry. For the most part, you could argue like AI might be changing that. But given that setup, do you think like that is kind of the right structure of a kind of a beachhead for crypto to really make like a bull market driving narrative?
Yeah, I think intellectual property and gaming assets. I mean, IP could be anything. It could be media, entertainment, scientific research, investment strategies. I mean, the reality is IP is a very, very broad reaching term. The part that we're looking at more so now is on the media entertainment side and just looking at royalty stacks and right stacks and creating efficient markets around that. All that comes down to what are you doing? You're creating a new credit market. I think the biggest TAM in the world and what drives everything is capital markets and cost of capital. So if you are able to create a new market with a substantial number of data points, so the world of content rights is enormous. The metadata that exists in the traditional world is dog shit. So the problem is, or not the problem, the real, I think, change comes when you start originating these assets on chain. So you mentioned AI. Remixing of content is a huge benefit, but a huge issue for the industry because with AI, there's basically infinite remixes of original content, and those typically are not spotted, nor are the original content creators paid, even if they're owned by, private equity magazines and catalogs. So do I think it can drive? Yeah, I think effectively DeFi of IP could be an enormous sector. Enormous. I mean, probably one of the biggest of the next, cycle or two, in my opinion.
Awesome. Sonny? The lens with which we look at narratives is fundamentally asking the question, what is crypto or blockchain better at than anything else? What is it good for? And our view is we pay a trust tax across a whole host of things every day, whether it's payments, it's buying something online, through to intermediaries. And crypto can be that trust coordinator and align incentives in a way that are much more powerful and make things easier, faster, more transparent, cheaper for all of us. And so with that lens, there's a couple of narratives that have really gotten substance that you've started to see shift. And then there's some that are kind of a little bit off the beaten path that we also spend time on. Two that are really, I think, partly because of regulation opening up stablecoin is a very easy use case. Everyone understands it. The challenge is because Bridge happened, some of these acquisitions, there's like 20 Me Too's trying to do the same thing. People that maybe don't fully understand how payments work, but the narrative is getting them funding. But underneath that, there are some really interesting founders solving for pain points around money movement, especially internationally, money movement from B2B perspective that currently has a lack of transparency, a lot of intermediaries, and expensive, and stables can just facilitate that in a pretty interesting way. And the other one, again, a lot of fluff in that area, but some substance around it is around tokenization, wrapping that and putting that in a regulatory compliant way for people to engage with, and allowing for better collateralization, better use of assets. And so that's kind of, you've seen some successful companies there. And then the other area where we spend time on that are a little bit outside of capital markets are things like supply chain, media and entertainment, ticketing, healthcare, HR, where we think, again, all these intermediaries capturing value with blockchain is just a better, and crypto is just a better way to coordinate. Right now, if you go to StubHub, you're paying 30% just being a trust coordinator. And so we have invested in a company that allows you to buy tickets the same way Robinhood reduced the cost of stock trading from $10 a trade to $0. We invest in a company called XP that basically you can buy the same inventory of tickets without paying an intermediary fee. And there's a lot of other ways to monetize that. And so we try to look at the traditional world and where blockchain crypto can just be that better coordinator of trust. And there's a lot of interesting companies. And that narrative, I think, as it becomes more mainstream and everything is now an internet, a mobile, and cloud company. I think pretty soon, in 10 years, everything will be on blockchain rails with a lot of AI embedded in it.
Want to give Sunny credit here. Putting his money where his mouth is. Those are a bunch of applications that I think his grandmother could probably use. So I'm impressed. One follow-up for you. Hard to push back against those narratives. I think I'm pretty excited about them all. Do we need a different archetype of founder to actually execute on some of these, like ticketing and healthcare? Like the traditional like DeFi degen doesn't seem like they could really tackle those markets. And when I think about like why hasn't this seemingly obvious set of narratives come to fruition so far, that's what comes to mind to me. Is that the case, or is there other blockers that are the reason that ticketing is still crazy exorbitant fees from StubHub?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a very good question, right? I think it's a question of the right environment, founder, expertise, and go-to-market. So I think the founders obviously matter, but I think because narratives matter, people are just focused on narratives, but the go-to-market matters. Like in 10 years, is everything, for the most part, every rail going to be on blockchain? Yes. But what are the first couple of dominoes to fall is important, right? For instance, there's hundreds of companies that have tried ticketing on blockchain. Most of them try, from my perspective, the failure is they're going primary. So you got to go to every venue. You got to get the venue on board. You got to get the artist on board. And that's a pretty manual intensive effort. So what is the right go-to-market? Our view is you go through secondary markets, kind of solve one side of that supply demand, have 50 million tickets on there, and get demand going, and then slowly move into primary. And there's a lot of other companies in other sectors doing that, right? And so go-to-market is important because we all know the end goal is here, but how do we kind of get there? And the first couple of steps are important. And very few founders understand that, and partly because they don't have the domain expertise and come from that space. And so we're seeing more and more people coming from the traditional space because they finally see these are better rails, and I want to build on these rails. And I spent a lot of time doing fintech for 10 years prior to this. Like I said, as a 0.72, the opportunity of fintech was to really change old financial systems. But what ended up happening was kind of trying to clean up old rails. And so you can only make incremental change happen. And here's an opportunity on brand new rails to make change happen. And so you're seeing more and more founders, especially after the regulatory change in the US, a couple of the acquisitions that have happened recently. So more and more founders with having worked in the traditional world are now coming here. Regulation is right. The go-to-market approaches are interesting. Funding is coming through. But still, the tokenomics are distracting. And so when things get hard, If someone is just marking a narrative and exiting and making tens of millions of dollars, and a founder here is pushing through and barely getting by, it's challenging, right? And so it's distracting. I don't blame founders for being like, should I just take that route? And so the founders that grit through here have been in the traditional world, understand that. I think that's what's exciting, but the outcomes are pretty crazy. The $1 billion outcomes you've seen with Bridge, with Deribit, and Inroads are just examples of that if you can push through.
I think Sonny hit on something super important there. If you're a capital allocator in the crowd, that is the reason to invest in crypto funds right now. The total hackathon founder, like hackathon count numbers are down from like all-time highs, but the amount of founders that are coming in from like domain expertise outside of crypto and applying crypto rails to it is way up, in my opinion. So I think that's one of the most exciting things I've seen. Dan, crypto narratives that you're excited about?
Yeah. So what I've found is that when you're building a narrative, you have to keep in mind that you have to be contextually aware, right? So narratives live in a marketplace of ideas against other narratives that happened before and narratives that could appear in the future. So the really powerful ones kind of play within that space. And, a lot of the examples that were given here were kind of like problem solution. I find that really good narratives are kind of within insights that the market don't know are there, right? Like it's like, hey, did you know X, Y, and Z? It's, oh, I never thought about that. And then within that blind spot, you can capture the imagination of people because it's kind of living there, but they really haven't put it into words. So like for me, two kind of high level narratives that I'm keeping an eye on is like open, fair protocols, right? That's a big narrative, right? There are lots of projects in the last 3 years that because of their capital structure actually made it difficult for participants to come in. They saw what happened post-launch. They drop, you could argue this for many different reasons, but in the minds of people, it's like there used to be fair projects. Now there are not fair projects, but moving into the post kind of regulated ICO world, you're going to see a lot of projects play with this idea of being fair. And, projects across the wide, anywhere in the technical stack could play around with that. Those can be tied to technical architectures, but this will probably be a non-technical narrative. And I think the second one is around networks, right? Here's an idea, right? The problem solution way to handle this would be like, we need to scale Ethereum, so we're going to launch a network. But the insight there is that, do you know that most groups aren't launching networks on Ethereum to scale Ethereum? They're doing it because they want to launch a network. And I think we're going to see people launch networks like we launch websites today. So that's a fascinating insight. Like, what do you do with this realization that there's going to be millions and millions of networks that appear? Maybe they're blockchains, maybe they're kind of post-blockchain DAG structures that sit across networks. But to me, that's a really powerful narrative that teams can actually build architectures around. They can be competitive around, right? So do you want to build a network, or do you want to be the thing through which other people build networks? That to me is like a very exciting one. I see a couple teams playing around with that. I think optional privacy is an easy one. I think kind of relative to maybe there's a lot of blockchain partners here. I think assets becoming commodities is an interesting, I don't know if this is a narrative, but maybe it's more like a top-level like thesis. Like at the end of the day, someone's not going to want to buy or someone's not going to know if they're buying gold on X blockchain. They're just going to be buying gold. So a narrative here is that the blockchains themselves might want to attack that part of the distribution and buy maybe the Robinhoods of the world, whereas before they weren't opinionated. So that's a narrative at the application layer that you're going to probably see people play out. So looking at that, either you see that these narratives are there and you can attack them either as a fund or as a blockchain, or if you're a player playing within that space, is there something you can do like as a sub-narrative or subcategory to differentiate?
One thing I think on you said stablecoin. So I think, and what that allows for is the more important part. Like I think issuers go for it, but I think issuers are a tough place to invest right now. Everyone wants to be the next Athena. It's just not going to happen. I think what is most important is that stablecoin adoption, regulation, perception is through the roof. And that is the infrastructure of an on-chain banking system. So to be able to have, because typically you come out of a trade and you go back into dollars. You can come out of a trade, go into stables, sit on a yield product. Then you could sit there and say, you know what, maybe I should purchase something on chain. Maybe I should play with a game. Maybe I should go into a DeFi, into a vault. I think the mass acceptance of stablecoins is most beneficial for the application layer. And that makes me incrementally, and I'm talking my book a bit because I really am bullish on applications, and we invest across both, but we lean heavier applications. But I've never been more positive since 2017 on applications in crypto, and it's specifically because of where stablecoins are today.
But do you think applications is a narrative?
I mean, it is. If we don't merit on this useful, then what are we doing here, right?
Is like as let's say I was an application that was
It's definitely an out of favor narrative.
but what would I do if I was a startup that was going to have a token and I was at the application layer? How would I use that as a narrative?
I think the narrative there is the underlying financial and like internet infrastructure is moving on chain, and therefore applications will be a big beneficiary, right?
More people will have more capital on chain. I keep more capital on chain than I ever have. I mean, personally, and that, you kind of got to eat your own. I was never the most active on chain user, and I become infinitely more in the last few years.
So do you think that the average token holder is going to go application tokens and hold them because
it's going to drive revenue on chain, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then we start moving away from narratives and into, the promised land that we've all been talking about.
I think that the divergence is, I think your perspective of narratives comes from the token holder perspective. I think
it's actually the infrastructure, the protocols themselves.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
I like narratives can also be from a perspective of like utilization, like internet narratives, e-commerce. You had Amazon, Uber, all these things, right? And so those are applications. Those are now the new narratives. When applications are actually built on it, no one talks about the infrastructure anymore. No one talks about AWS or Azure. They're talking about the actual applications and utilization of that. People talk about ChatGPT. That's an application of AI. And so, as we have real applications, the narratives move towards the utilization of it.
Awesome. Well, bunch of narratives for you guys all to noodle on. Michael is as bullish as he's ever been. So excited to go forth and see all this be made. Thank you, guys.